You're listening to Conflict Radio on the Conflict Radio Network. Greetings and welcome to Conflict Radio. Today is September 10th, 2020, and today we're going to have Leigh Paynter on. She wrote the book Pine Barrens Devil, and we're going to talk a little bit about the New Jersey Devil. Leigh Paynter was born and raised in South Jersey. She has been a print and television journalist for more than 15 years and served as a United States Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia. The Pine Barrens Devil is her first published work of fiction. She lives in San Francisco Bay, but New Jersey will always be her home. Now, the Jersey Devil is going to be, I guess, a pretty interesting show. I've learned some things over the last few days researching this that I had never heard before, and I grew up in New Jersey. So I think this is going to be an interesting interview, especially if you aren't from New Jersey and might not know too much about it. So I hope you enjoy it. We're going to get right to it. We'll be back with Leigh Paynter right after this. Welcome back to Conflict Radio. We're with Leigh Paynter. She's the writer of The Pine Barrens Devil. We're going to get into her a little bit about, I guess, the Jersey Devil and what it is, and there's a little bit of controversy about it. I had never heard this story before about Benjamin Franklin. Leigh, do you want to tell us all about the Benjamin Franklin story? I didn't hear anything about that.
Yes. So doing my research, and I've heard these rumors for years as a kid, but with the advent of the internet, a few more of these stories have popped up. But historians have found that the legend of the Jersey Devil very well could have been started by one of the founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. And that was because there was a rival publisher at the time. If you might remember, Benjamin Franklin had his almanac. Well, there was a rival publisher in Philadelphia named Titan Leeds. And they had this animosity back and forth between each other. And at this time, in the late 1700s, this story started coming out about this woman named Mother Leeds who had a child, her 13th born child, delivered as a beautiful baby boy, but then he turns into a demon because she cursed him. She didn't want to have a 13th child. So this demon flew out the chimney and into the Pine Barrens where he now lives. And if you look at Titan Leeds' history, in that area, he does have I believe, a great aunt who had given birth to a 13th child or to 12 children. So that's what it looks like it's tied to. And Titan Leeds' father, Daniel Leeds, he was a Quaker in the area. He was pretty successful out there in the Pine Barrens as well, but he did love astronomy. And as a Quaker, that was greatly frowned upon. And so there were these rumors even before Benjamin Franklin came into the picture about Daniel Leeds having ties to the occult. It's all politically motivated. But that is the original story believed to have been created by Benjamin Franklin, pretty much just to tarnish the reputation of Titan Leeds.
So the story itself, the Leeds story, do you know much about that story?
So the way the legend is told is that Mother Leeds was about to give birth to her 13th child, and her husband wasn't around. She didn't have much help and support. Trying to feed another 13th child was really weighing on her, and she had a midwife with her helping her deliver. And during the course of childbirth, she cursed, saying, "I hope it's the devil." So this beautiful baby boy was born, blue eyes, super chubby and cherubic, and then he quickly started changing into a half goat, half bat, half horse, and he terrified the midwife. Some stories say that he killed the midwife, and then he flew out into the chimney and has forever lived in the Pine Barrens and kind of serves as an ambassador and protector of the Pine Barrens. It's such an enigmatic forest that has so many mystery to it in and of itself that the Jersey Devil is now kind of its guardian to keep it preserved.
So doing your research on this subject, I would imagine that you came across a lot of stories that were pre-Leeds, right?
There were a few stories about different sightings. Even Napoleon's brother, the one who was exiled to the colony of New Jersey, he went out on a hunt and claims that he might have seen the Jersey Devil. There were also several sightings or potential sightings in like the early 1900s. There was also some unexplained livestock murders, slaughters, basically, and no tracks, just destroyed herds. Also, the forest in and of itself, like I said, is just so creepy. You can walk in, and if you're not following the river, you can get turned around. And people have been lost out there. And even the Lenape tribe of Native Americans that are from that area, long before Benjamin Franklin came into the picture, they had referred to the Pine Barrens as Popwessing, which means the land of the dragon. So there very well could have been some entity out there long before the story of the Jersey Devil and Mother Leeds ever came into existence.
Yeah, my wife and I, we grew up in New Jersey as well, so we're real familiar with the Leeds story. We've been to the village and everything down there, and have done a lot of the Leeds, the Leeds touring stuff. Been down the dirt road to the house and all of that stuff. And we had never heard of this. In fact, my wife, I told her that I was doing a show with you about the Jersey Devil. She said, I used to work with one of the Leeds, I guess, descendants, and she asked her about the story in the Jersey Devil, and she got real defensive and was like, "Well, we don't talk about that, blah blah blah." Why don't you think they tell the true story of the Benjamin Franklin hoax?
I think it's because it hasn't been 100% determined, and so many Jerseyans do really feel that there's something out there. We love the Jersey Devil. If you're from New Jersey, you love the devil.
Yeah, but I don't mean that it's a hoax. I mean that the story, the original story is kind of a hoax.
The original story,
well,
in my opinion, yes, I do think that it was created just to damage the reputation of one single family that was out that way. But there have been so many unexplained things that have happened in the Pine Barrens, and the Native Americans in that area also, had some stories to tell. So many people have seen things, or so many people have experienced strange, unexplained situations out in the Pine Barrens that there very well could have ever been something out there. As for the Leeds family, I've never spoken to them. I know that one descendant did write a book, a history of the Jersey Devil, and pretty much collecting all the information that he could, from family stories and historical accounts, sightings, newspaper articles from the 1900s. Why some family members don't want to talk about it, I mean, I think it's kind of, it's their personal family story, and it could either be harmful, or hurtful to them. I do know that there is one descendant, she's a woman, and I don't remember her first name off the top of my head, but, she loves the legend, and she loves having that connection to it, and she decorates her home, every year for their Halloween, based with, Jersey Devil memorabilia and stuff. So.
Yeah, and if you ever go out that way, you'll see Leeds this, Leeds that, pretty much everywhere. So, I mean, of course they're gonna love the story now,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think that would be such a great thing to have in your family background.
Yeah, it's great. So this is your first book, isn't it?
It is. I never set out to really be an author, but I'm glad that I did it. But for my first work, I didn't want to do a full novel. I didn't know if people would give me a chance as a new author, so I wanted to do a novella, which is under 30,000 words. I am happy that it kind of clocked out a little bit longer than Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but it is a short book. Most people get through it in a night.
Yeah, it really is a great book. I love the way you pretty much it has 4 stories, and they're all in different time periods. And I love the way it's all the same character. you'll see a lot of crossovers with the stories as you go, which are real subtle. But if you're paying attention, you'll pick up on. I don't know if I could spoiler alert the hat, right? Like that was a really neat add to it as well. I love the way you did it. I love the way it crosses over. It really is a great book.
Thank
So
you. Thank you. My
how
inspiration for it was I always loved Washington Irving's short stories. So The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. So I really wanted to kind of continue with that kind of style of American folklore with this.
awesome? And you wrote this story for your brother, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell
So
us about that?
Oh, yeah, I would love to. My brother and I were really close growing up. My parents, they just couldn't decide where they wanted to live. We moved around quite a lot, but just in southern New Jersey. So we had a home in Winslow for a number of years, then Hamilton. We had a couple of months spent in Tuckerton. And then I went to high school in Camden County and college in Gloucester County. So I'm all over New Jersey. But because we moved so much, trying to make friends again, there was quite a few summers where it was just my brother and I. So we became really close because we really only had each other. And specifically when we had left Winslow, we were having a house built in Hamilton. So the house wasn't ready yet. We moved in with my uncle's shore house down in Tuckerton, and about 9 months out of the year, that's where we lived, and we were commuting back and forth through the Pine Barrens to get to the school that we were staying at in Hamilton. And my father sometimes would pull over and just take us on hikes in the Pine Barrens, and we would go on Jersey Devil hunts. There was also this small library in Tuckerton that my brother and I would go to, and there were so many books on the Jersey Devil too that we just kind of got really into the legend that particular year. And I started wanting to impress him and entertain him with tales of the Jersey Devil and coming up with my own stories, my own campfire-like stories. I was also having, night terrors, and so was he. And I kind of tapped into some of those nightmares to create these stories for him. And I always loved impressing him. Like when I would get done a story and he would say, "Ooh, that's a good one." That always made me feel really good about myself. The last story that I wrote, which is chapter 4, was when I was in high school. So most of the characters are like high school age at that time too. A couple of years later, my brother had joined the Marines. He apparently had an incredible experience in Afghanistan that he couldn't talk about. And he suffered from PTSD, and it was kind of like a 4-year struggle with him, kind of disappearing, him having nightmares. And, but, when he was having good days, I always loved to talk to him. We talked pretty regularly. And he had asked me, this was probably back in 2012, he said, "Oh, those stories you used to tell about the Jersey Devil, when I have kids someday, I want to retell them. So if you can write them down for me, that would be great." So I was like, okay, I made a promise, I was going to do it. And then in 2014, he passed away. And it was a heroin overdose, but mostly tied to kind of just the nightmares he was having with his PTSD. He just couldn't get over. So now that I decided to write these down, not just for him, but for a larger audience, it definitely became so much more involved. You need to do more character development. You need to do more details and backstory. So I wanted to make sure that I not only did him proud, but also New Jerseyans. I wanted them to be proud of the work and make sure things were as accurate as possible. So that's why I hired a couple of professional editors to make sure that I was on the right track with this. And, since I was building out the stories and the characters so much more, I actually took inspiration from actual news stories. So people that had been in the news for the wrong reasons kind of became characters in the book. And, as a journalist, I kind of like that tie-in. So yeah, some of the characters you might sound familiar. If you're a good news follower, you might be like, "Oh, okay, this person definitely sounds like this person in the news."
Was your brother a chess player?
No, he wasn't. I was always interested in chess. I never was good at it, but I specifically learned I wanted to get better in order to do chapter 3. And I based that character off of Bobby Fischer.
Okay.
That was a story that my brother and I were always interested in, his life story. So I based, that character off of Bobby Fischer.
So what would you say your first story was that you told? Was it
The
about
very
not about the Jersey Devil, but just the first story period?
The very first story I ever told, I was in kindergarten, and I wrote my very first, I guess, book for my kindergarten class, and it was about a pumpkin that was green and needed to turn orange by the time Halloween came around. And that was inspired because I found what I thought was a green pumpkin in the woods by our house, and I was so impressed with it. And then I carved it, and it turned out it was a watermelon. But that was the actual first story I ever wrote. My mom still has it somewhere.
That's pretty awesome. Nothing disappoints like carving a pumpkin and finding out it's a watermelon. Or
Apparently, my parents knew, and they thought that I knew. But I truly believed it was a green pumpkin.
so, of all the research you've done, what would you say some of the most intriguing stories are that you've heard that you haven't been able to really understand?
I would say, let me go through my notes here. I think Napoleon's brother was one that was pretty interesting. That was 1812. Joseph Bonaparte, who was Napoleon's older brother. He had an estate in Bordentown, and he decided to go on a hunt. And the story there was that he started seeing strange tracks in the snow, and was following them. And when he looked up, he came face to face with what he claimed was the Jersey Devil, which was like this huge beast that had a goat's head and these long leather wings that didn't seem appropriate to hold up a body that large. So that was his story. In the 1900s, there were, I guess, maybe nearly 1,000 reports from eyewitnesses throughout South Jersey. One even claimed that they saw him either at the Batstow River or the Bass River conversing with a mermaid. And I know that there was a newspaper that was in a circus that was asking for any plausible evidence of the Jersey Devil, that they would give a cash reward. So that was actually something that happened.
Wow, that's the mermaid story was kind of added to your book as well. I thought that was a great story. My favorite story in the book was the second one, more of the Revolutionary War story. You must have had to have done a bit of research on that to have been able to do the story like you did.
So that's why the book took as long as it did to write, because I wanted to make sure. So I wrote the second chapter, the one with the Revolutionary War. That was the very first one I ever told my brother. But of course, I wasn't very accurate on the details as an oral storyteller. So in writing the story down, I wanted to make sure that it kind of was very symmetrical to actual events that were happening at that time in New Jersey. So the research that I had to do, was actually finding what the original names were of certain towns in New Jersey as a colony, what they were under British rule, what the British flag was that would have been flying at that time, the battles, which militias would have been working with George Washington that were from New Jersey. So I spent some considerable time making sure that was accurate and that the clothing was accurate. So anyone that, has any type of experience in history and has a knowledge of that, reading the story wouldn't be completely turned off if I was off with some details. So I wanted to make sure that it was as close to accurate as I could get.
Now, the pirates you mentioned in that story that were running, I guess, the town in the Pine Barrens, was that real?
Yes, that was real. So Chestnut Neck was a real place. It was Tuckerton area. That Little Egg Harbor, it's spelled differently now, doesn't have the U in it, but Little Egg Harbor existed. And they operated by helping, move things through the ports and getting supplies to Batstow, which would later then go to Philadelphia and helping out Washington's army. So yes, these are all real places. Bayville existed back then. So did Double Trouble State Park was operating back then. And of course, the name Double Trouble, I couldn't really pin down if it had an actual name at that time, but that's what it would have been. So yeah, I made sure that everything was as close to accurate, and especially if I'm going to name places. If you're from New Jersey and you're from that area, you're going to know it, and you're going to know if something's off. So I wanted to make sure that it was pretty close.
Yeah, well, those people from Jersey, they'll call you out on it in a minute
Exactly.
if it's wrong at all. Now, you're in San Francisco today, right? Are you in San Francisco? I have that right.
I'm in Oakland. Yes.
How is it out there with the fires?
It's terrible. Yesterday was worse. Today it's not as creepy, but yesterday we had this bright orange sky, pretty much all day long. It was dark. I have several lamps on right now. Normally I don't need them, because the Bay Area is pretty sunny usually, but it's dark in here. I'm about 3.5 hours away from the nearest wildfire, and we're still getting smoke coming down here. I left the windows open, and my laptop was next to the window, and my laptop had ashes all over it. My car is covered in ashes. So it feels like it gets worse every year. At least, twice a year, it seems like we have to deal with a wildfire, and the point where if I'm not in danger of any fire, I'm definitely suffering from the smoke from them.
Did the fire go through any of those redwoods at all?
Yes, the one that was created by the lightning storms a couple weeks ago went through Big Basin, which is a huge redwood park. The thing about redwoods is that out of all of the trees, redwoods kind of have a high tolerance for wildfires, just because of like the oil of its bark. It'll scar, it'll burn, but it doesn't necessarily destroy the tree. So the tree still has another chance. So usually if there's a fire in the redwoods tend to stand. All the other structures like the visitor centers, those get destroyed, but the trees end up standing.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that there's some kind of seed, I guess, out there that doesn't grow unless there is a wildfire. So hopefully that'll spawn some new life, and it'll just be better after everything. It really is a shame that there's so much chaos this year going on and everything. I wanted to ask you about the fires because there was not too long ago, wasn't there a major fire that went through the Pine Barrens?
In the Pine Barrens, to be honest with you, I'm not familiar of one that was of scale that I'm used to out here in California. There have been a few fires over the years, but nothing to the scale that we see out in California.
Has there been any recent sightings of the Jersey Devil out that way?
Unfortunately, no. I was trying to find anything that might have been, I don't want to say no. There was one article within the last couple of years, I want to say maybe 2017 or 2018, where someone claims to have taken video of the Jersey Devil. It's very blurry. It's very much like, the Bigfoot sightings. And then someone else had one where it definitely looks like a stuffed animal flying through the air. So those, and they get press in New Jersey. Anything related to the Jersey Devil, I think, gets some attention, no matter how plausible it is initially, because people just love hearing those stories, and I guess for the most part, New Jerseyans just hope that he's still out there. But no, nothing major, nothing like it was in like the early 1900s, where thousands of people were reporting sightings or strange occurrences.
Yeah, well, the Pine Barrens used to run all the way through Quaker Bridge and even up to, like you said earlier, Bordentown. The Pine Barrens aren't anywhere near as big as they used to be, even though they're still pretty big.
Yeah, absolutely. And Quaker Bridge does make and the actual Quaker Bridge makes an appearance in one of my stories. And I do appreciate that the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, the state has, they both have done a great job with trying to preserve the Pine Barrens and keep the parks nice, and educating the public on the Pine Barrens and how to keep it preserved, and protect the ecosystem. So I do think New Jersey does a great job in that respect.
So do you think the Jersey Devil's still out there?
I hope so. It's been a few years since I've been out there. Since I've lived out there. I did go to the Batstow Historic Village last October. But it has been a couple of years since I've lived in New Jersey. And I would hope so. I would hope that, something we haven't yet discovered is still living in the Pine Barrens. I mean, it's very dense. It's very protective of its own self. There's a good possibility that there's something still out there.
So what are you on to next?
Well, I was using this kind of as a test, this book, to see how well it was going to be received, how well my writing was going to be received, because I do want to tackle a ghost story related to what happened with my brother in Afghanistan. That would be an actual full novel. So far, I've gotten some really great feedback, and I'm hoping to tackle that. That's going to be a much bigger project.
So do you have a bit to tell about that? Did he see a ghost?
So the story is that he is the ghost. And this happened to me after he had passed away. For months, I was seeing my brother everywhere, but I was seeing him at different ages. I was seeing him as a child. I was seeing him at 6 years old. I was seeing him as a high school kid. And I would just get sightings and I would just see him. So it kind of travels like this. This ghost is reaching out to kind of talk about what happened in Afghanistan. And it's going to be a thriller. It's going to involve another Marine that did something horrible. And for this woman to try to get to the bottom of, okay, well, this Marine served with her brother. So what exactly happened in Afghanistan? And, what's going on with these guys? And I do have a few of my brother's friends that have offered to help tell the story. They don't want to go on record with any news reporter or any other author and tell, a nonfiction account for a couple of reasons. A lot of them, are trained not to talk about what happened over there. And a lot of them are upset and embarrassed and just concerned about what people will think about them. And what they did over there. So writing it as a fiction story was a way that we can get that told.
What are some of your best childhood memories with your brother?
My brother was a good guy. He was my younger brother. And I remember I was getting picked on in Hamilton. I went to St. Joe's and we had to take the public school bus home. And for some reason, these kids just targeted me. And they would trip me. So every time I would walk on the bus, and I was just dumb, I would just always fall for it. Anytime I walked on the bus or anytime I walked off the bus, they would stick their feet out and I would trip. And I remember one time I just got, so upset, I ended up kicking one of the kids in the shins. And my brother, who was just a little guy, he was in third grade, he just started attacking these kids that were much bigger than him. And he knew I was embarrassed by it. And I never wanted to talk to my parents about what was going on, and he never did either. He kept that, somehow he just knew that I didn't want to talk about it with anybody, and so he kept that secret, and I really appreciate that about him. He was just always a good-hearted person.
So this nightmare that inspired you to write your stories and tell your stories, can you tell us about it? Can you
Sure.
Can you tell us the nightmare, the story?
Yeah, sure. So these nightmares have been going on for quite a bit, and my brother had very similar ones. So it gets dark, and it's time for me to go to bed, and I walk up the stairs, to my bedroom, which is at the far end of the house, and I can tell that everyone else is asleep. So I'm the only one last up. And I'm walking into my bedroom, and I automatically sense that I'm the intruder, that someone else is already in here. And next thing I know, I'm completely in the room, but off to the side, and I see this ginormous man, a figure gathered up in shadows. And he's just a silhouette almost, but he's a giant. He's huge. He takes up pretty much from the floor to the ceiling. And he doesn't seem to notice me, and I can't really see his face. It's obscured because he's wearing this heavy wool coat, like something from the Revolutionary period that has this tall collar, and he's got this hat that's like lowered over his eyes, that's a wide brim hat, something along the lines of like a beaver felt hat from that time period as well. So I can't really see his face. He's hunched over a table that is way too small for him. And he's staring at a chessboard, and he's playing the Dark Army. And there is nobody else, though, playing against him. It's almost like he's playing against himself. And at this time, I noticed that there is this very steady drum beat that is just consuming the room. And I can feel it throbbing in my ears. And I try to cover my ears because it's getting louder and louder. And it's like, giving me a headache. It's pounding my head. But I can still hear it, and I feel the vibration of it, and I start to realize that this drum beat that I'm hearing is his heartbeat, because that's how huge he is. And he doesn't seem to be paying any attention to me. He's focused on this chess game in front of him. And even though he's playing against himself, he seems incredibly frustrated. And the drumbeat is growing louder and faster the more frustrated he gets. And it's terrifying to me. And I feel that this huge, dark figure is also expanding and growing. And he's taking up more and more of the room. And I can sense that he's getting very angry with himself with this chessboard. And part of me wants to go over and like take that seat opposite him and start playing. But also I'm terrified. I don't want him to notice me. I don't want him to ask me to take up, the chess piece, because once you get started, you can't stop. Like the game has to finish at some point. And I don't know what the end game is. I don't know, what happens if I win, and I don't know what happens if I lose. So I keep telling myself, don't pick up a chess piece. Don't pick up the chess piece. And throughout this whole time, the beat is just growing deeper and louder, and he's growing larger in size, that he's taking up more of my bedroom, and I'm just crouched in this corner just watching and looking at the pieces on the board and not understanding what his strategy is. And I start to tense up, and but I can't close my eyes. and finally I see him just lift up his right arm, and he creates a fist and just slams it like a hammer onto the chessboard. And it splits the wood of the table, but the chessboard and the pieces don't move at all. Like it's still the same game. So the chess pieces will bounce, but they're still in place. And finally, I just take a breath, and like he just disappears. And the next thing I know, I'm in my own bed, and he's not there. I'm not standing in a corner. I'm not crouched in a corner. I'm in bed, and I realize like, oh, this was just a dream. So I get up the next morning. I finally fell back to sleep, but I get up the next morning, and I start to walk out, and I step on something like a Lego piece is what it feels like. And it turns out it's a white pawn. So I touched it. And that is the dream. And this is this reoccurring nightmare. I see him playing chess about once a year, even though I now live miles away across the country. He still visits me, and it's still my childhood bedroom, though.
Wow, that's scary.
It is. It's terrifying. And for the longest time, I would always tell my brother too. I'm like, I swear it's the Jersey Devil. Like that's who's here.
Are there other cryptids that you believe in that you're interested in and perhaps writing about in the future?
I really always loved the Headless Horseman, if you do consider him a cryptid, which I know some people do, because I was such a huge fan of Washington Irving as a kid. I loved those short stories, and that was probably one of the most fascinating characters, too, because it was based off of a Hessian soldier. and how it just terrorizes that one part of New York, the Hudson River Valley. And it's almost kind of like written like a love story to that area as well. So Headless Horseman would be probably number one. I started, getting interested in, the Mothman prophecies. There are sightings out here. I went to a park over the Labor Day weekends. I went on a backpacking camping trip, and there have been sightings of Bigfoot out in the same area. I didn't notice anything. And the advent of creepypasta, when I started hearing the stories about Slender Man, that one really resonated with me too, because that one really does remind me of these night terrors as well, and of the Jersey Devil. Like, you don't know what his presence means, what the purpose of his visits mean, and should you follow or should you be afraid, or do you want to do his bidding? It's that unknown that is absolutely terrifying. And you question yourself with those kinds of stories too. It's like, what kind of person am I? Am I someone that, does have the capability of true evil given the opportunity? Like, those are things you don't want to discover about yourself. And like these monsters, they kind of, enable you to bring that out if you have it in you. So that's what makes them so terrifying.
Do you think that it's your love of being scared or love of telling stories that perhaps draws these things to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as a kid, I always loved being scared. And my parents, they would try to limit the horror movies that we were allowed to watch. I mean, we would try to sneak them, at other kids' houses, but they never stopped us from reading horror books. So they could stop us from the movies, but, we would pick up horror books all the time. And, my parents were just happy that we were reading. My father's also a really great oral storyteller. He loved telling campfire tales. And those were like always the best ones to hear. Like, you can only ever hear, like, as a child, like if once you heard Little Red Riding Hood, you've heard it a million times and you want something different. So my father was really great about coming up with stories on the fly. And I think that's, what influenced my campfire stories with my brother. And, I just, monsters, specifically, and where they come from. Like, it's not just like, oh, there's a monster here, but kind of the background, like how they came into existence, I always thought was so much more fascinating. And if something could still be out there, considering there has been, some sort of not hard evidence, but, these stories have existed for so long, starting with the Native Americans. It's like, well, there's got to be some reason that, these occurrences happens. And, what is the possibility that something could be out there that hasn't been discovered yet?
Yeah, you gotta wonder if it's not interdimensional or something like that. Maybe they're crossing over in certain areas, and the Pine Barrens is just one of those places where
Yeah.
different things cross over,
Yeah, absolutely. Anything's possible. I mean, we're still discovering new species under the sea. So finding something, or, I think it was the singing dogs that were just discovered in Papua New Guinea. They thought they were extinct, but they've just been hiding really well all this time. And there's a thriving community of them. So, just because we can't see it now doesn't mean it's not out there.
Yeah, I think there was something else they just found up on Mount Rainier that has been pretty much gone for a long time as well.
Exactly. I mean, we think that we have such a huge footprint, but when, you actually discover that these communities of animals have been thriving, it's like, wow, we really don't, and people aren't everywhere. And if someone doesn't want to be found, they're not going to be found.
Yeah, that's the truth. Any Bigfoot sightings up there where you are? Have you seen anything other than your dream that caused you to pause?
No, I really wish I had good stories, but I don't. I think it's part of because you're looking, you're not going to find it. I think it's, the people that are skeptical, that are not actively, going on Jersey Devil hunts or, trying to find something. They're the lucky ones that end up coming across something really spectacular. But No, unfortunately, I just have to rely on other people's stories. I've never been that lucky.
That's pretty incredible that all this stuff is going on under our noses, and we just don't have any idea what it really is, do we?
No, but I think that's what also makes it, such a good story, and how different things can be interpreted. And like I said, with my dream too, I always just associated that nightmare man with the Jersey Devil. And, who knows, like, what subconsciously, we have these types of communications, who knows?
Have
And I
you
think that's
ever
just what makes it so much more fascinating.
have you ever heard of the Black-Eyed Kids?
No, I haven't.
You should look into that. A lot of the stories from the Black-Eyed Kids, the only you only see them after you hear about them. So now that I've told you about them, maybe you'll see them.
Okay, excellent. I'm writing this one down right now too. I'm thinking about doing a whole blog post too on different cryptids and, where they might be located and what kind of stories are out there.
Yeah, the more you learn about them, the higher your chances that they'll actually come to you. They're pretty interesting stories. We did one here on Conflict Radio on the Black Eyed Kids. You can always go back and listen to that. We actually had a listener call or send an email with a story, and I was like, oh, I got to get this guy on with an expert, and I did. And now that I know about him and I've been talking about him, I've been looking for him, waiting for him to show up at my door. So hopefully they don't.
Gosh.
Maybe you'll have better luck.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the tip.
Well, this was a fascinating book. I strongly recommend everybody grab a copy. It's not that expensive. You can get it on Amazon. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find you? And
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go on Amazon, you can type in my name, Leigh Paynter, and it's Painter with a Y instead of an I. Or I also have a website, which is leigpaynter.com, and I link to it there. And I have a couple of blog posts, like 6 fast facts about the Jersey Devil, 6 fast facts about the Pine Barrens. So if that is of interest to anybody. And I know the Pinelands Preservation Alliance will also be selling my book as well in their gift shop.
awesome. And we'll be right back on Conflict Radio right after this. Welcome back to Conflict Radio. That was Leigh Paynter. Her book, The Pine Barrens Devil, is available on Amazon. Just go ahead and search for it, and you can pick yourself up a copy. I got mine, and it's actually a really good book. I enjoyed the crap out of it. You can always find us on the web. Just go to www.conflictradio.net. You can find us on YouTube, the Conflict Radio Network, and you can also find us on all the normal podcast catchers. Just search for Conflict Radio. We're going to go ahead and call it a day. We'll be back on Tuesday. We'll be back with a new show. Until then, batten down the hatches and be safe.